She didn't slow down, not when her hands started shaking, not when the thin band on her wrist buzzed, sharp, sudden, and her whole body flinched like she'd been struck. She swallowed, sped up, kept cleaning. The Mafia boss watched her from the doorway. He noticed she never stopped moving, not once. And when she finally looked up and saw him, what crossed her face wasn't surprise, it was terror. Someone had turned fear into a system, and it was happening inside his house. Her name was Isolde Quintera. She was 31 years old, originally from a small town south of Puebla, Mexico, and she had been working inside the Voss estate for just over 4 months. She had been hired through an agency, or what had been presented to her as an agency, and placed in the household under the supervision of the head housekeeper, a woman named Prudence Ashford. Isolde had arrived with a single suitcase, a laminated work permit that she kept folded in the zippered pocket of her bag, and a quiet determination to send money home every 2 weeks to her mother, who was caring for Isolde's 7-year-old daughter. She had no car, no friends nearby, no phone plan that allowed international calls longer than 3 minutes. The estate was located 40 minutes outside of the nearest town, at the end of a private road lined with old-growth oaks. It sat on 12 acres of manicured land, surrounded by a stone wall and a security perimeter that Isolde had been told was for the family's privacy. She understood what that meant. She had known from the beginning that the man who owned the house was not a businessman in the way that word was normally used. The cars in the garage, the men who came and went at odd hours with hard faces and careful hands. The way the phones worked, encrypted, rotated, discarded. She had seen enough to understand the broad shape of it, and she had made a decision that many people in her position made. It didn't matter. What mattered was the paycheck. What mattered was the money that left her account every 2 weeks and arrived in her mother's hands 3 days later. And what mattered was her daughter eating 3 meals a day, attending school with new shoes, sleeping in a bed with a real mattress. Everything else, the danger, the secrecy, the vast silence of the house at night, she could absorb. She had been absorbing things her whole life. What she had not anticipated was Prudence. Prudence Ashford was 53, tall, angular, and immaculate. She wore her graying hair pulled back in a tight bun and dressed in pressed black slacks and crisp white blouses that never seemed to wrinkle, no matter the hour. She had been the head housekeeper at the Voss estate for over 6 years, and in that time, she had cultivated an atmosphere of efficiency so complete that most people who visited the house didn't even notice the staff. That was the point. Prudence didn't scream. She didn't curse. And she didn't slam doors or throw things or raise her voice above a moderate instructional tone. She was, by all outward appearances, a professional. But professionalism, Isolde had learned, could be a weapon. It started in the first week. Small things, corrections delivered in front of other staff members, inspections of work that had already been inspected, a clipboard that appeared in Prudence's hand every time Isolde entered a room, as though her very presence required documentation. "You're 3 minutes behind on the east hallway," Prudence would say, without looking up. "Mark it." Isolde didn't know what mark it meant at first. She learned there was a system. A schedule so granular, it broke the day into 15-minute blocks, each one assigned to a specific task, each task assigned a completion standard, in each standard measured by something. Isolde didn't understand the metric. She only understood the consequence if the block turned red on Prudence's tablet. There was a conversation. And the conversations were never loud, never angry, but they always ended with the same quiet sentence. "We wouldn't want any issues with your documentation, would we?" That was the thread, the invisible wire that Prudence pulled whenever she needed Isolde to bend. It was never a direct threat. It was a suggestion, wrapped in concern, sealed with a smile. "I know how hard it is for people in your situation," Prudence would say. "I'm trying to help you succeed here, but if you can't meet the standards, I have to report it, and reporting goes to the agency. And the agency, well, you know how these things work." Isolde knew how these things worked. She didn't argue. She didn't push back. She adjusted. She moved faster, worked longer, slept less. She stopped taking breaks, stopped sitting down during the day, stopped looking out the windows at the grounds because standing still in front of a window might look like she wasn't working. And then, 6 weeks in, the band appeared. Prudence called it a wellness tracker. She presented it during a routine meeting in her office, a small, windowless room off the main laundry corridor that smelled like fabric softener and discipline. The family has invested in a new monitoring system for household staff, Prudence said, laying the device on the desk between them. It was slim, matte gray, about the width of a fitness watch. There was no screen, no buttons. Just a smooth, featureless surface with a faint seam where the clasp met the band. It tracks your movement patterns and productivity output, Prudence continued. It helps us ensure that everyone is working efficiently and maintaining their well-being. It also monitors your rest periods to make sure you're getting adequate sleep. She said this with the same even tone she used for everything, as though she were describing a benefits package. You'll wear it at all times, Prudence said, including during sleep. It syncs with my system every 30 minutes, and I review the data each morning. Isolde looked at the band. Something about it felt wrong, not in any way she could articulate, but in the way certain things feel wrong the moment you see them. A locked door that shouldn't be locked, a smiling face that shouldn't be smiling. Oh, what if I don't want to wear it? Isolde asked. It was the only time she would ask. Prudence tilted her head. It's a condition of employment, Isolde. I thought the agency explained that our household uses performance monitoring. She paused. Let the silence do its work. Of course, if you're uncomfortable with our systems, that's entirely your choice. I can arrange for your departure by the end of the week. I'll need to notify the agency. Naturally, they'll update your file. Isolde put on the band. It fit snugly against her wrist, just tight enough that she couldn't rotate it without effort. The material was smooth but not soft. It had a clinical quality, like a hospital ID bracelet. For the first 3 days, it did nothing but sit there. Isolde almost forgot about it. She cleaned, she cooked, she folded, she swept. And the band was just a band. On the 4th day, it buzzed. She was standing in the second-floor hallway, arms full of folded towels, when her body simply stopped for a moment. The way a body will stop when it's been moving for 11 hours straight. Not a break, not a rest, just a pause, a breath. The band vibrated against her wrist, quick, sharp, like a phone notification, but deeper, more insistent. She startled, nearly dropping the towels. Then she moved. She didn't think about it, didn't analyze it. Her body simply responded to the stimulus the way any body would if stillness had been paired, suddenly and without warning, with a physical sensation that said wrong. Later that night, lying in her narrow bed in the staff quarters, she told herself it was just a reminder, a nudge, like a step counter that vibrates when you've been sitting too long. That was all. On the 7th day, it shocked her. She was in the kitchen, refilling the supply closet. She had stopped to read the label on a cleaning product, 5 seconds, maybe 6. When the band delivered something that was not a vibration, it was a jolt, small, precise, and deeply unpleasant. Not enough to make her cry out, just enough to make her arm jerk and her breath catch. She looked down at her wrist. The band sat there, smooth and silent, as though nothing had happened. When she looked up, Prudence was standing in the doorway. If it buzzes, Prudence said calmly, that means you stopped. Keep moving and it won't bother you. Simple. She turned and walked away. That night, Isolde tried to take the band off. The clasp didn't respond to her fingers. And there was no visible latch, no release mechanism. She tried sliding it over her hand. The fit was too tight. She tried using a butter knife to pry the seam. The material didn't budge. She stared at it for a long time. Then, she went to sleep. Because her shift started at 5, and the band would know if she didn't get up on time. Within 2 weeks, the band had rewired her, not her thoughts. Those remained her own, as sharp and desperate and exhausted as ever. But her body had been retrained. It had learned a new set of rules, and it followed them with a loyalty that bordered on betrayal. Rule 1, never stop moving, not for a breath, not for a thought, not for a cramp, not for a prayer. Movement was safety. Stillness was pain. Rule 2. Never pause at a window, a mirror, or a doorway. And the band seemed to differentiate between productive movement and idle standing. Looking at something, really looking, registered as a stop. Rule 3. Never slow down. The band appeared to have a baseline pace. Falling below it triggered the warning buzz. Falling further triggered the shock. The threshold was not generous. Isolde adapted because that was what she had always done. She learned to fold sheets while walking, to carry supplies with both arms so she never had to make 2 trips. To clean baseboards from a squat that allowed her legs to keep shifting, keep moving, keep the band satisfied. She stopped eating lunch. There was a designated break period, 30 minutes at noon, but the band buzzed halfway through every time, and after 2 shocks during meals, her body simply refused to sit at the table. She ate standing up, while I'm in the laundry room, spooning rice from a container, while her feet shuffled in small circles on the tile floor. She slept in intervals. The night mode that Prudence had mentioned tracked her movements even during rest, and if Isolde lay too still for too long, not asleep, but motionless, the band would issue a low, persistent vibration that dragged her back to awareness. She began sleeping in a light, anxious trance, never fully unconscious, never fully at rest. Her body twitched in the dark, her wrist tingled even when the band was silent, as though the anticipation of pain had become its own sensation. She began having nightmares, not the kind with monsters or falling, but the kind that were worse because they were ordinary. She would dream she was sleeping peacefully, deeply, her body loose and warm and still, and then the buzz would come, and she would wake up already moving, already on her feet, already walking toward the door before her eyes were fully open. The worst part was the gratitude. On the days when the shocks didn't come, when she moved fast enough, steadily enough, obediently enough to stay ahead of the system, she felt grateful, actually grateful. As though the absence of punishment was a gift, as though a day without pain was something she had earned, rather than something she was owed. She recognized, somewhere in the back of her mind, that this was wrong. That the gratitude was a symptom, not a feeling. That the system had taught her to be thankful for the same thing every human being is born with, the right to exist without being hurt. But recognition and resistance are different things, eh? And you can know the cage is a cage and still not have the key. She thought about her daughter constantly, about the phone calls she was allowed to make once a week, 3 minutes each, from the hallway phone where Prudence could hear every word. She had learned to keep those calls light, cheerful, full of the kind of easy lies that parents tell children to protect them from truths they're too young to carry. Mama's fine, mija. Mama's working hard. Mama will send money next week. She never told her daughter about the band. She never told her about the shocks, or the sleeplessness, or the cream she rubbed on her wrist every night in the laundry room while her feet shuffled in their small, desperate circles. Some truths are too heavy, even for the person carrying them. Giving them to a 7-year-old was unthinkable. And through all of it, the world above her continued as though nothing was wrong. The house was clean. The meals were prepared. The staff appeared efficient and content. When visitors came, and they did periodically, men in expensive suits with careful eyes, they saw a well-run household, nothing out of place, nothing to question. Prudence made sure of that. She ran the staff with a precision that looked from the outside like excellence. The schedules were detailed. The expectations were clear. The results were immaculate. If anyone had asked, she would have said and believed that she was simply maintaining standards, that the band was a tool, that the shocks were incentives, that the threats were motivation, that the woman who flinched at her own wrist every 7 minutes was simply someone who needed more structure. And that was the architecture of it, not cruelty for its own sake. That would have been recognizable, resistible, reportable. This was cruelty dressed in spreadsheets, abuse filed under performance metrics, a woman's terror logged as response time data, and no one noticed, because no one was looking. Leander Voss was not the kind of man people expected. The word mafia conjured images, Hollywood images mostly, loud men, gold chains, violence as punctuation, Leander was none of that. He was 44, lean, dark-haired, and so quiet in a room that people sometimes forgot he was there until he spoke, at which point they remembered immediately. He had inherited the organization from his father, who had inherited it from his father, who had built it from nothing in a country that treated immigrants like kindling. And the Voss family operated in logistics, real estate, construction, and several other industries that existed in the gray space between legal and everything else. They were not saints. They were not trying to be, but Leander had rules, not the kind written on paper, the kind carved into bone. You don't touch civilians. You don't use children. You don't profit from human desperation. You don't let power become cruelty. And you never, under any circumstances, allow someone under your roof to be abused. That last rule was personal. It came from a memory he never spoke about, a memory involving his mother, a man who was not his father, and a locked room on the second floor of a house in Queens that smelled like cigarettes and fear. He had been 8 years old. He had heard everything. He had been able to do nothing. And he was not 8 anymore, so when he began noticing things about the new maid, things that didn't add up, that nagged at him the way a wrong note nags at a musician, he did not dismiss them. He paid attention. The first thing was the movement. Isolde moved through the house like someone who was being chased by something invisible, not hurried in the way that busy people are hurried, purposeful, directed, efficient. This was different. This was compulsive, frantic, the kind of movement that comes not from having too much to do, but from believing that stopping will trigger something terrible. He noticed it in the way she turned corners, fast, always fast, like the hallway behind her might close, in the way she carried stacks of linens that were too heavy for her frame rather than making 2 trips, and in the way her eyes darted to her wrist every few minutes with an expression that was not checking the time. The second thing was the flinch. He was walking through the East Wing one afternoon when he heard a faint buzz, barely audible, like a phone on vibrate at the bottom of a bag. He turned the corner and saw Isolde standing near a window. Or rather, she had been standing near a window. In the half-second it took him to appear, she was already moving, already in motion, as though the buzz had injected adrenaline directly into her bloodstream. She hadn't seen him. She hadn't heard him. The buzz had been the only trigger, and her body had responded before her mind had time to process. He watched her disappear down the hall, arms full of nothing, walking somewhere with purpose that didn't exist. The third thing was the wrist, and he saw it at dinner one evening. Not a formal dinner, just a quiet meal. He took alone in the kitchen because the dining room felt too large for one person. Isolde was clearing plates from the counter, and as she reached for a glass, her sleeve rode up just enough for him to see the skin beneath the band. It was red, not sunburned red, irritated red. The kind of redness that comes from sustained contact with something that shouldn't be there. Chafing, pressure, or something worse. There was a thin line of darker discoloration directly beneath the band, as though the device had been pressing into her skin long enough to leave a mark that went deeper than the surface. She caught him looking and pulled her sleeve down so fast it was like watching someone slam a door. "It's nothing," she said before he had asked. I didn't say anything," he replied. "It's a wellness tracker. The housekeeper gave it to all of us. It helps with scheduling." She said this in the flat, rehearsed cadence of someone who had practiced the explanation so many times it had become automatic. A verbal reflex, a lie that had been repeated enough to lose its edges. "It monitors my steps and sleep quality," she added. "It's very helpful." She was smiling. The smile didn't reach her eyes. It didn't even reach her cheeks. It sat on her mouth like a mask that had been placed there by someone else. "Does it bother your skin?" he asked. "No, sir." "You're sure?" "I'm sure, sir. Thank you." She left the room faster than she'd entered it, and the faint buzz from her wrist trailed behind her like a leash made of sound. Leander didn't ask anyone about the band, not yet. He was a patient man. Patience was what separated him from the men who came before him, the ones who acted on impulse and ended up in concrete or courtrooms. He understood that information gathered too quickly was often information gathered wrong. Instead, he watched Over the next several days, he adjusted his routine so that his path through the house intersected with Isolde's more frequently. He took his coffee in the east wing instead of the study. He walked the second floor in the early morning instead of going straight to the gym. He found reasons to be in rooms where she was working, not hovering, not interrogating, just present, and what he saw confirmed what he'd feared. She never sat down, not once, not in the kitchen, not in the hallway, or not in the staff lounge that had been set up with chairs and a small table specifically for breaks. He saw other staff members, the cook, the groundskeeper, the part-time cleaner who came 3 days a week, sitting, resting, talking, eating, normal human behavior. Isolde was never among them. She ate standing up, always in motion, always in a room where she couldn't be seen from the main hall. He caught her once in the laundry room, spooning something from a small container, while her feet moved in a slow, mindless shuffle, left, right, as though some part of her brain was counting the steps, even while the rest of her tried to swallow food. He noticed the way her hands trembled when she was tired, which was always. He noticed the shadows under her eyes, not the kind that come from one bad night, but the kind that build over weeks of sleep that never quite arrives. He noticed the way she startled at sounds that weren't loud, a door closing, a phone ringing, a voice from another room. He noticed, most of all, the way she looked at Prudence. It wasn't anger. It wasn't resentment. It was the look of an animal that has learned which human controls the food and the fence. Attentive, anticipatory. Afraid, when Prudence entered a room, Isolde's speed increased, her posture changed, her eyes dropped to the floor, and her hands found work, any work, all work, it didn't matter what. As though the mere presence of the head housekeeper activated a survival protocol buried so deep in her nervous system that consciousness was no longer required. One evening, Leander found Isolde in the downstairs bathroom adjacent to the laundry room. The door was ajar. She was standing at the sink, running cool water over her wrist. The band was still on. It didn't come off, he realized. She couldn't take it off. But she had pushed it up slightly, and she was carefully applying cream to the skin beneath it with her fingertips. The skin was raw, not cut, not bleeding, but raw in the way that skin becomes when it has been subjected to repeated irritation, friction, heat, or electrical contact. There were tiny raised bumps where the metal contacts on the underside of the band met her skin, and the tissue around them was inflamed and tender. She was applying the cream with the careful, practiced efficiency of someone who had done this many times. There was no frustration in her movements, no anger, just maintenance, on the way you might patch a tire or tape a crack in a wall, not because you expected it to hold, but because the alternative was worse. She looked up, saw him in the doorway. The cream disappeared into her apron pocket so fast it might never have existed. "Sorry, sir. I'll go back to work." "Isolde." "Yes, sir." "When was your last day off?" She blinked. The question clearly confused her, as though the concept had been filed away in a drawer she'd forgotten how to open. "I, have my rest periods, sir. The schedule is very fair." "That's not what I asked." "I'm fine, sir, really. Prudence has been very good to me." She smiled the smile again, the mask, and walked past him, already moving, already working, already performing the version of herself that kept the band quiet. And he stood in the doorway of the bathroom and looked at the sink. There was a faint residue of the cream on the porcelain. Next to it, a small hand towel that had been folded and refolded so many times the fabric was soft as tissue. He opened the medicine cabinet above the sink. Inside, hidden behind a box of bandages, was a small tube of hydrocortisone cream, nearly empty, squeezed from the bottom, with the careful economy of someone who can't afford to waste anything. Next to it, a packet of gauze and a roll of medical tape, both partially used. She had been treating herself, for months, in secret, in a bathroom off the laundry room at midnight, with supplies she had probably purchased from a drugstore during one of the rare, supervised outings that Prudence permitted. She had built a small, private medical station in a house that had a full first aid room upstairs. A room she apparently didn't feel safe using, because using it would mean admitting that something was wrong, and admitting that something was wrong would mean facing the woman who had told her that wrong was a word reserved for people with options. Leander closed the cabinet. He thought about the economics of it. A tube of hydrocortisone cream cost $4. The band had taken $3,000. Isolde was spending her stolen wages to treat the injuries caused by the theft. The circularity of it was obscene. The system didn't just hurt her, it made her pay for her own recovery. Leander Voss had seen many things in his life. Bodies, betrayals, men who wept, and men who didn't. And he had seen power used as a scalpel, and power used as a hammer, and power used as a slow, grinding weight that crushed people so gradually they didn't realize they were being destroyed until there was nothing left to destroy. This was the third kind, and it was happening in his house. Leander made a call, not to Prudence, not to the agency, not to anyone who might tip off the architecture of control that had been built, brick by careful brick, around a woman who had no one to call. He called Caius. Caius Drummond was Leander's right hand, not in the dramatic sense, not the consigliere of movies and myth, but in the practical sense. Caius was the person who knew where the bodies were because he had helped move them, and he was also the person who knew where the accounting was because he had helped audit it. He was 41, broad-shouldered, bald by choice, and had the emotional range of a filing cabinet, which, in their line of work, was an asset. "I need you to look into something," Leander said. "The household monitoring system that Prudence runs. The scheduling software? Whatever it is. I want to know what it tracks, what data it collects, and where that data goes. This about the staff? This is about one staff member." Caius paused. He knew the tone. It was the tone Leander used when something had crossed a line that existed only in his own internal code. A line that most people couldn't see, but that, once crossed, triggered a response as certain and irreversible as gravity. "I'll have it by tomorrow." Caius had it by that evening. He came to Leander's study at 9, carrying a laptop and a folder. He set both on the desk and opened the laptop without ceremony. "The system's called TrackRight," Caius said. "Enterprise Workforce Monitoring. It's marketed to warehouses, fulfillment centers, agricultural operations. DUBI tracks worker movement, break durations, productivity rates. Everything's logged and time-stamped." "How did Prudence get it?" "She set it up herself. Accounts in her name, billed to a personal card. The estate isn't involved. Your name isn't on it." "What does it connect to?" "The wristbands. There are 3 registered devices, but only one is active. Serial number matches the one assigned to Isolde Quintera." "What does it do?" Caius turned the laptop toward Leander. On the screen was a dashboard. Clean, professional, corporate. It looked like any project management tool. And there were graphs showing movement patterns, bar charts showing active time versus idle time, and a log that scrolled down the right side of the screen in neat, time-stamped entries. "It monitors her location within the house," Caius said. "Tracks her pace, her break times, her idle periods. If she stops moving for more than 90 seconds, it sends a warning vibration. And if she keeps stopping," Caius clicked a tab labeled Compliance Actions. The screen showed a log. Each entry had a timestamp, a duration, and a code. Some were marked VW for verbal warning, which, Caius explained, was the vibration. Others were marked PA for performance action. "What's performance action?" Leander asked, though his voice suggested he already knew. "The band has 2 conductive strips on the underside. When a PA is triggered, it delivers a low-voltage electric pulse, about the same as a static shock from a car door, but repeated and targeted." Leander said nothing. "It's technically classified as a haptic feedback mechanism in the product documentation," Caius continued. "The company that makes it went through 3 lawsuits and rebranded twice. They're based in Delaware. The product's not illegal. There's no law specifically prohibiting it, but it's been banned by 2 state labor boards and flagged by 3 human rights organizations." "How often has it shocked her?" Caius scrolled through the log. "In the last 30 days, there have been 147 vibration warnings and 31 electrical pulses. The pulses cluster in the evening hours, between 9 p.m. and midnight." "Night mode," Leander said. Caius looked at him. "Then you know about that?" "Not yet. Keep going." Night mode is a setting that increases sensitivity during designated rest periods. The threshold for idle time drops from 90 seconds to 45. The rationale, according to the product manual, is to discourage extended, non-productive rest periods during overnight shifts. She's not on an overnight shift, she's sleeping. The system doesn't differentiate. Leander stared at the screen. The data was clean, organized, professional. It looked like a performance review, not a record of abuse. And that, he understood, was the entire point. The system had been designed, deliberately, carefully, commercially, to make cruelty look like management. "What about the threats?" Leander asked. "Oh, what threats?" "Prudence has been threatening to report Isolde to immigration." Caius's expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened. "Isolde's work permit is legitimate. I verified it when she was hired. She's documented. Her status is current." Prudence told her otherwise. If she did, she lied. Isolde's paperwork is clean. Leander closed the laptop gently. The motion was careful, controlled, the way a man handles something when what he really wants to do is put his fist through it. "One more thing," Caius said. He opened the folder and placed a printed spreadsheet on the desk. Prudence has been docking Isolde's pay. Every time a PA is triggered, Prudence deducts $50 from her paycheck. She's logged it as performance adjustment. In the last 4 months, she's taken over $3,000. The room was quiet. "She's been stealing from her," Leander said, "and using fear to make sure she never asks for it back." Leander stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at the grounds. The lawn was immaculate. The gardens were trimmed. The stone walls stood solid and silent in the dark. His house, his property, his responsibility. A woman had been tortured under his roof. Not with fists, not with weapons, but with a system so clean and so quiet that it had operated for months without anyone noticing. Without him noticing, he thought about his mother, about the locked room, about the sounds through the wall. He was not 8 anymore. "Get me Prudence's full personnel file," he said. "Every reference, every past employer, and every address she's lived at in the last 10 years. When do you want it?" "Now." Caius left. Leander stayed at the window. He was very, very still. The next morning, Leander arrived in the kitchen at 4:55. Isolde was already there. Of course she was. The band ensured it. She was preparing the coffee service, a task that normally took 10 minutes, but that she had compressed into 6, because 6 meant she could move on to the next block before the system flagged her. She didn't hear him come in. She was too focused on the rhythm. Grind, pour, measure, arrange. Her hands moving with the mechanical precision of someone who had rehearsed the sequence so many times that consciousness was no longer invited to the process. He sat down at the kitchen island. The sound of the stool scraping against the floor made her jump. "Hey, good morning, Isolde." "Good morning, sir." Her voice was steady. Her hands were not. He watched her work. He said nothing for a long time. The silence was not aggressive. It was patient. The silence of someone who is making space for a truth that isn't ready to come out yet. "Isolde," he said finally, "I'd like to ask you something, and I'd like you to answer honestly." She stopped, then started again. Couldn't stop. The band was awake. "Yes, sir." "Does that band on your wrist hurt you?" The question landed in the kitchen like a stone dropped into still water. Isolde's hands paused, just for a moment, just long enough for the fear to register and the reflex to kick in. And then she was moving again, wiping a counter that was already clean. "It's a wellness tracker, sir. It monitors my—" "I know what Prudence told you it is." His voice was quiet, not angry, worse than angry. "I'm asking what it does." Isolde's jaw tightened. Her eyes dropped to the counter. The band buzzed, faint, insistent, demanding, and her feet shuffled, maintaining the minimum pace. "It helps me stay on schedule," she whispered. "Isolde. It buzzes if I stop too long, that's all. It's normal. Lots of places use them." "Does it shock you?" Silence. "Isolde, does that band deliver electric shocks to your wrist?" Her breathing changed. It was subtle, a shift from the controlled, steady rhythm of someone who has learned to make their body invisible. to the shallow, uneven breathing of someone whose body has just been told that the invisible thing has been seen. She didn't answer. She couldn't. And the lie was ready. It was always ready, sitting behind her teeth like a guard dog. But something about the way he asked, something about the way he was sitting there at 5 in the morning, looking at her like she was a person and not a function, made the lie impossible to release. A tear fell onto the countertop. She wiped it immediately. Another one fell. She wiped that too. The band buzzed. She kept cleaning. "Sir, please," she said, and her voice cracked. "I need this job. I have a daughter. If Prudence finds out, Prudence won't find out anything. She'll call immigration. She said she would. She said my papers aren't—" "Your papers are fine. Your work permit is legitimate. I verified it myself." Isolde stopped. Actually stopped. The band buzzed. She didn't move. It buzzed again, harder. She still didn't move. "My papers are real," she whispered. "They've always been real." Something broke, not loudly, not dramatically. There was no collapse, no sobbing, no falling to the floor. The break was internal, structural, the quiet failure of a load-bearing wall that had been holding up a building, made entirely of fear. She stood there in the middle of the kitchen and didn't move, and the band buzzed, and she didn't move, and it buzzed again, and she didn't move. And then, for the first time in 4 months, her body was still, not frozen, not paralyzed, still. The way a person is still when they've been running for so long that stopping feels like a new kind of breathing. The band delivered a shock. She flinched, but she didn't move. Leander watched the shock register on her face, the quick jerk of pain, on the reflexive clench of her jaw, and something in his expression changed. It was subtle. If you didn't know him, you might have missed it. But if you did know him, if you knew the landscape of his face the way Caius did, or the way his late father had, you would have recognized it immediately. It was the expression that came before a decision, not a question, not a consideration, a decision. He stood up, walked around the island, stopped in front of her. "Give me your hand," he said. She looked at him. The terror was still there. It would be there for a long time. But there was something else now, too. Something thin and fragile and desperate, like a shoot breaking through concrete. She held out her wrist. Leander looked at the band, looked at the raw skin beneath it, looked at the small, imprecise burns where the conductive strips had been pressing into her flesh for months. He took her hand gently, more gently than his hands should have been capable of, and examined the clasp. There was no latch, no button, no visible release. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folding knife, not a weapon, a tool. The kind of blade that had opened 1,000 boxes, cut 1,000 cords, solved 1,000 small problems. He slid the blade under the band, carefully, and cut. The band fell to the counter with a small, plastic sound. The sound of a thing that had been more powerful than it had any right to be. Isolde looked at her bare wrist, at the red, irritated skin, at the small marks that would take weeks to fade and longer to forget. She pressed her free hand over her mouth. And then she cried, not quietly, not politely, not in the practiced, invisible way she had learned to cry in the laundry room at midnight with a towel pressed against her face. She cried the way a person cries when the thing they've been holding back finally becomes too heavy to carry. Leander didn't touch her, didn't hold her, didn't tell her it was okay. He just stood there, solid and present and furious, not at her, never at her, and let her have the moment. When the crying slowed, he spoke. "You're going to take today off. You're going to eat. You're going to sleep. And you're not going to wear that thing ever again. But Prudence, I'll handle Prudence." Leander didn't summon Prudence to his office. That would have been the expected move. The formal approach, the power dynamic of a desk between them, the architecture of authority. Instead, he went to her. He found her in her office at 8:15, seated behind her small desk, reviewing the morning's data on her tablet. The TrackRight dashboard was open. Isolde's name was highlighted in yellow, flagged presumably because the band had stopped transmitting. Prudence looked up when he entered. She didn't stand. She didn't smile. She assessed, the way she always assessed, cataloging his expression, his posture, the temperature of the room. "Good morning, Mr. Voss. I noticed an anomaly with one of the monitoring devices. I was just about to sit down, Prudence. She was already sitting, but the instruction reframed the dynamic so completely that she straightened, as though the chair had changed shape beneath her. Leander closed the door. He didn't lock it, or he didn't need to. I removed the band from Isolda's wrist this morning, he said. I cut it off. Prudence's expression did not change. She was very good at that, at maintaining the mask of professionalism, even when the structure beneath it was shifting. But her hands, resting on the desk, pressed slightly into the surface. I see, she said. May I ask why? Because it was shocking her. The device provides haptic feedback for it was shocking her, Prudence, electrically, 31 times in the past month, mostly at night, while she was trying to sleep. The night mode parameters were set within the manufacturer's recommended. You increased the sensitivity during sleeping hours so that normal rest would trigger a punishment response. You turned a human being's sleep into a violation. Prudence opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Mr. Voss, I understand your concern, but I assure you that the system is designed to optimize productivity. The literature clearly states, Prudence. His voice had not risen. It had not sharpened. If anything, it had gone lower, quieter, which was worse. I'm not interested in the literature. I'm interested in the fact that a woman in my house has been tortured for 4 months, and you logged it as performance data. Tortured is a very strong. You shocked her when she stopped moving. You shocked her when she tried to rest. You docked her pay every time the system registered what you called a failure. You stole over $3,000 from her wages, and you kept her compliant by telling her, falsely, that her immigration status was at risk. Prudence's face went through a series of rapid adjustments. Surprise, calculation, indignation. And then, finally, the expression she settled on. Righteousness. I was managing a difficult employee, she said. The standards in this house are extremely high, and some people need more structured guidance than others. The agency placed her here with the understanding that there is no agency. Prudence stopped. I had your records checked, Leander continued. The placement agency you used is a shell company. You set it up yourself 18 months ago. You've been recruiting workers directly, specifically immigrants, specifically women, specifically people who are isolated and vulnerable, and placing them in positions where you control their housing, their pay, their schedules, and their ability to leave. The color left Prudence's face, not all at once. It drained slowly, unlike water from a cracked vessel. Isolda isn't the first, is she? Silence. Before her, there was a woman named Yaretsi Solorzano. She lasted 2 months before she quit, or before you made the conditions unbearable enough that she believed quitting was her only option. Before Yolanda, there was Nayeli Tlapaltotl. She lasted 6 weeks, before Maria. Those women were underperformers, Prudence said. Her voice had changed. The professional veneer was cracking, and beneath it was something colder, something that had been hiding for a long time. They couldn't handle the expectations. That's not my fault. You selected them because they couldn't fight back. You targeted people who had no support system, no local contacts, no understanding of their own legal rights. You weaponized their isolation and their fear. And you did it not because you're a monster, Prudence. You did it because you could. She stared at him. Something shifted behind her eyes. Not remorse, not guilt, but the sudden, sickening awareness of someone who has been operating behind a curtain for years and has just realized the curtain is gone. What are you going to do? She asked. Leander looked at her for a long time. You're going to leave this property today, he said. You will take nothing that doesn't belong to you. You will not contact Isolda. You will not contact any former employee. You will not contact any agency, real or fictional. And if I don't, then I will provide the documentation I've gathered, the device logs, the pay records, the shell company filings, the testimony, to the U.S. Department of Labor, the State Attorney General's office, and the FBI's Human Trafficking Task Force. The word trafficking hit the room like a thrown stone. That's not, Prudence started. Forced labor, wage theft, coercive control through fraud and intimidation, exploitation of an individual's immigration fears for economic gain. Leander recited the terms calmly, as though reading from a list. I've been advised that these charges would qualify under federal trafficking statutes. You might want to verify that with your own counsel. Prudence stood up. Her hands were shaking now, a detail that Leander registered with something that wasn't satisfaction, but wasn't far from it. You can't do this, she said. I've been here 6 years. 6 years I've kept this house running. You don't know what it takes to. I know exactly what it takes. And I know what you took from the people who did the actual work. She took a step toward him. Not threatening, desperate. The desperation of someone who has been in control for so long that the loss of it feels like a physical injury. I built something here, she said. This house was chaos before me. The staff were lazy, unreliable, undisciplined. I created a system that... You created a system that hurt people, Prudence. That's all you created. That's not fair. Fair. He said the word as though he was tasting it, finding it bitter. You want to talk about fair? Tell me, was it fair when Isolde lay awake at 3 in the morning, afraid to close her eyes because your device would shock her for sleeping too deeply? Was it fair when she ate standing up in the laundry room because your system punished her for sitting down? Was it fair when she rubbed cream on electrical burns at midnight in a bathroom the size of a closet because she couldn't use the first aid room upstairs without you knowing? Each question landed like a strike. Not loud. Not violent. Precise. Prudence's mouth opened and closed. The righteousness was fracturing. Beneath it, something else was emerging. Not guilt, not quite, but the cold recognition of someone who is seeing their own actions reflected in a mirror they can't look away from. She could have said something, Prudence whispered. She could have come to you. She couldn't. That's the point. You made sure she couldn't. You took every exit and locked it. That's not management, Prudence. That's a cage. The room was quiet. You have 2 options, Leander said. You have 2 options, Leander said. You leave today, in quietly, with your belongings and nothing else, or I hand everything I have to federal investigators, and you leave in a very different way. He paused. Let the weight of it settle. One more thing, he said. The $3,000 you stole from Isolde. It will be returned to her account by the end of the day. From your account. Caius will provide you with the transfer details. He walked to the door. You have 2 hours. He left. Prudence Ashford left the Voss estate at 10:23 that morning. She walked out the front door, carrying a single bag. The same kind of single bag that Isolde had arrived with, though Prudence's contained considerably more expensive contents. Caius stood by the door, not blocking it, not threatening, just present. A witness, a wall. She didn't look back. A car was waiting at the end of the drive. A black sedan with tinted windows, and a driver who would take her to a hotel downtown, where a room had been booked for 1 night. After that, she was on her own. The system was dismantled that same day. Caius personally oversaw the process. The TrackRight account was deleted. The data was downloaded first. Caius kept copies of everything always, but the live dashboard, the monitoring protocols, the night mode settings, the compliance logs, all of it was wiped. The band itself, the small, gray device that had controlled a woman's body for 4 months, was placed in a clear plastic bag and locked in the estate's security safe. Evidence, in case it was ever needed. The household staff were assembled in the main kitchen at noon. There were 5 of them, including Isolde. Leander addressed them personally, which was unusual. He typically left household matters to the housekeeper, for obvious reasons. He told them that Prudence had been terminated. He told them that the monitoring system had been deactivated. He told them that their schedules would be restructured, that their pay would be reviewed, and that anyone who had experienced anything inappropriate was welcome to speak with him directly, without fear of consequence. He said this in English and then repeated it in Spanish because he spoke both fluently, a fact that surprised some of the staff, though it shouldn't have. His grandmother had been Mexican. The language was as much a part of him as the silence. He did not explain what Prudence had done. That was not his story to tell. But the staff understood. They had eyes, they had ears, and they had noticed things about Isolde that they had filed away under not my business, because in a house like this, minding your own business was a survival skill. He thanked them. They went back to work. But the air in the house was different. lighter somehow, as though a pressure system that no one had consciously registered had finally broken. Isolde was not at the meeting. Leander had told her to rest, and for the first time in months, she had done so. She slept until 2 in the afternoon. Real sleep. Deep sleep. The kind of sleep that comes when the body finally believes it won't be punished for surrendering. When she woke, the band was gone. Not just from her wrist, from her room, from the house, from the world she could see. She lay in bed for a long time, not because she was tired, because she could. When the money was returned, $3,250 appeared in Isolde's account by 4 p.m., transferred from Prudence's personal funds, as instructed. Caius confirmed the transaction and printed a receipt, which he delivered to Isolde in an envelope with no label. She opened it, looked at the number, and sat down. She sat down. In a chair. Without moving. Without shuffling. Without glancing at her wrist to check if something was about to hurt her. She just sat. And the chair held her. And the room was quiet, and nothing buzzed, and nothing shocked, and nothing happened except the slow, impossible return of a sensation she had almost forgotten. Safety. Not the kind that's promised. The kind that's felt. In the bones. In the breath. In the strange, a disorienting stillness of a body that is finally being told. You can stop now. Recovery is not a straight line. It's not even a line. It's more like weather, unpredictable, layered, full of false starts, and sudden storms, and moments of clarity so sharp they feel like pain. For the first week, Isolde's body didn't trust the new rules. She still woke at 5, still moved through the house with a speed that was too fast for someone who wasn't being monitored, still flinched at her bare wrist when she changed positions, as though the ghost of the band was still there, still buzzing, still demanding. She would catch herself, mid-step, mid-task, mid-breath, and force herself to slow down. It felt unnatural, dangerous, like walking on a tightrope without a net, except the net had been the thing trying to kill her. And she still ate standing up. Not because she had to, but because her body had forgotten how to eat while sitting. The chair felt wrong. Too still, too passive, too much like the kind of rest that used to be punished. She had to retrain herself, the way a person retrains a hand after a fracture. Slowly, deliberately, with the patience of someone who understands that healing is not the same as forgetting. Leander noticed. Of course he noticed. He noticed everything, but he didn't push, didn't hover, didn't try to fix her with words or gestures, or the kind of well-meaning attention that can, for someone who's been controlled, feel like a different kind of surveillance. He gave her space. Real space. The kind that isn't just distance, but permission. He told her she could take as many days off as she needed. She took one. Then she came back to work. Because work was the one thing that had always been hers, the one thing that existed before Prudence, before the band, before the fear. She didn't want to lose it. She wanted to reclaim it. But the work was different now. She moved at her own pace. She took breaks, real breaks, sitting down, drinking water, looking out the window at the grounds without the terror of being measured for it. She ate lunch in the kitchen with the other staff, slowly at first. Then, with more ease, her body gradually accepting that the chair was safe, that stillness was allowed, that the absence of pain was not a trap. She called her daughter on a new phone that had appeared on her bedside table one morning, or prepaid. Unlimited international minutes, no note attached. She didn't need one. And the first call lasted 45 minutes. She cried for most of it. Her daughter told her about school, about a boy who pulled her hair, about a dog the neighbors had adopted, about a drawing she had made of a house with a big garden and a tall woman standing in it. "That's you, Mama." Isolde laughed, the sound surprising her, as though she'd forgotten it was something her body could produce. She started calling every day, not because she needed to, because she could, because no one was timing her, because no one was logging the minutes, because the phone was hers, and the time was hers, and the voice on the other end was the only sound in the world that had never been weaponized. Her mother asked once if everything was all right. Isolde said yes. This time it wasn't a lie. She began to notice things she had stopped seeing. In the way sunlight moved across the kitchen floor in the morning. the smell of the gardens after rain, the texture of the linens she folded, not as a task to be completed before the next block turned red, but as a physical sensation. Cotton. Cool. Soft. She noticed that the other staff members talked to each other, laughed, complained about traffic and weather and television shows, ordinary things. The currency of ordinary lives. She had been living in the same house as these people for months and had never participated in a single casual conversation because casual required stillness, and stillness was not allowed. Now it was allowed, and it was terrifying and wonderful and strange. One afternoon, the cook, a heavy-set man named Toribio, who had been at the estate for 3 years and who made empanadas on Thursdays because he missed his grandmother, set a plate in front of Isolda while she was sitting at the kitchen table. "Eat," he said. "I'm not." "Eat." She ate. The empanada was perfect, crispy, warm, filled with something savory and familiar that tasted like a memory she couldn't quite place. "My grandmother's recipe," Toribio said. "It's wonderful." "I know," she laughed again. It came easier this time. She slept. Not perfectly. There were nights when she woke gasping, reaching for her wrist, expecting the buzz, the shock, the punishment for the crime of being unconscious. But those nights grew less frequent. The gaps between them grew longer. The sleep grew deeper. Her wrist healed, the redness faded, and the small burns where the conductive strips had pressed into her skin flattened and paled, becoming marks that could be covered by a watch or a bracelet or left bare because they were hers, and she got to decide. 3 weeks after the band was removed, Isolde found Leander in the garden. He was sitting on a stone bench near the eastern wall, reading a book, something thick in Italian, with no title on the cover. The sun was low and warm, and the grounds were quiet in the way that expensive properties are quiet. Carefully, deliberately, expensively, she stood a few feet away, unsure of protocol. He looked up. "Sit down," he said. It was an invitation, not an instruction. She could feel the difference now. She sat for a while. Neither of them spoke. The garden smelled like cut grass and rosemary. A bird was doing something complicated in the hedge. "I wanted to say thank you," she said finally. "You don't need to thank me." "I know, but I want to." He closed the book, looked at her. His expression was not warm, exactly. Leander Voss was not a warm man, in the way that word is usually meant. But there was something in his face that she had come to recognize. A steadiness, a solidity, the quality of a person who had decided something and would not be moved from it. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "Why did you notice?" He was quiet for a moment. The bird in the hedge finished its complicated business and flew away. "Because I know what it looks like," he said, "when someone is too afraid to be still." She didn't ask what he meant. She didn't need to. And some understandings don't require explanation. They exist in the shared language of people who have known what it's like to live inside someone else's rules. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "Of course." The worst part wasn't the shocks. The worst part was that I started to believe I deserved them. That I was slow. That I was lazy. That the band was right and I was wrong, and the only way to be good enough was to never stop. She looked at her wrist. The marks had faded to thin, pale lines, barely visible unless you knew where to look. "She turned my body against me," Isolde said. "She made me afraid of my own stillness, like my body was the enemy, and the only way to be safe was to keep punishing it." Leander didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. "That's what control does," he said. "It doesn't just take your choices. It makes you forget you ever had them." They sat in the garden for 20 more minutes. Isolde didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. She was sitting, in a garden, with her bare wrist resting on her knee. And nothing buzzed, and nothing shocked. And the only sound was the wind in the trees and the distant hum of a house that was finally, quietly, safe. Months later, Leander would receive a letter from the Department of Labor confirming that an investigation had been opened into Prudence Ashford's activities. The letter was formal, bureaucratic, and bloodless. The The kind of document that reduces a woman's suffering to case numbers and statute citations. Caius had provided them with everything: the device logs, the pay records, on the shell company paperwork, the testimony of 3 former employees who had been found, contacted, and assured, in their own languages, by people who understood their fear, that speaking up would not destroy them. Prudence would face charges, not the dramatic kind, not the cinematic perp walk, not the headlines, the quiet kind, the kind that grinds slowly through a system that is, for all its flaws, occasionally capable of recognizing that what happened in that house was not management. It was not discipline. It was not performance optimization. It was a woman, alone, being punished for being still, and a man who noticed, and a band that was finally, permanently silent. Isolde stayed at the estate, not because she had nowhere else to go. Leander had made it clear that she could leave whenever she wanted, in that he would help her relocate, help her find housing, help her with whatever she needed. He offered it plainly, without conditions, without the kind of generosity that expects a receipt. She stayed because the house had become something different, not just a workplace, not a cage, a place where she could be still, where she could sit in a chair and eat a meal and look out a window and feel the absolute, radical luxury of not being watched. She brought her daughter to visit in the fall, a small girl with dark hair and bright eyes who ran through the gardens like they had been built specifically for running, who laughed at the fountain and chased a cat and fell asleep in her mother's arms on the bench by the eastern wall. Isolde held her daughter and did not move. She sat in the garden, in the late afternoon sun, one with her child's weight warm against her chest and her bare wrist resting on the arm of the bench, and she was still, not from exhaustion, not from fear, not from the learned helplessness of a body that has been conditioned to associate rest with punishment. She was still because she chose to be, because her body, after everything, had finally learned the most difficult lesson of all. That stillness is not a crime. That rest is not a weakness. That the absence of pain is not a trap. That she was allowed, permitted, entitled, to simply exist in a space without earning it. The sun moved across the garden. The shadows lengthened. The house stood quiet and solid behind them, and somewhere, in a locked safe, in a room that no one entered, a small gray band sat in silence, powered down, disconnected, finished, just a thing. Just a piece of plastic and metal that had once been more powerful than a gun. Now it was nothing, and the woman it had tried to break was sitting in a garden, holding her daughter, breathing, just breathing, and that was enough.